It all started with silence. Snow in the city is usually a change of scenery, white, fluffy, cozy, but that day was different. The sky hung low from morning, leaden and throbbing like a bruise. The air was still and thick, hard to breathe. The weather report said, wind strengthening expected 15-20 meters per second. Numbers that say nothing to the soul. By evening, the wind arrived. It didn't start. It arrived like a giant beast approached the city limits and began to howl, first in a high pitch, then in a bass that made the windows tremble. The snow stopped falling now. It was carried horizontally in dense, prickly streams that carved at your face. This wasn't a snowfall. It was a white gloom. The world outside the window shrank to the size of an oil paint smear, white with dirty grey streaks. The power went out. At first, it was fun, candles, gas burners, attempts at jokes. But when the darkness outside merged with the darkness inside the room and the wind's howl turned into a constant roar, the fun died. The house, a sturdy 9-story panel building, began to groan. Every seam creaked. The air howled in the ventilation shafts. It felt like we, like a ship, had been thrown into the very heart of a monstrous storm. And then the strangest thing began. Through the howl of the wind, I began to distinguish other sounds. Not like the creaking of metal or the roar in the pipes. It was a grinding. Metal on metal, but muffled, as if wrapped in felt. And a knocking. Not random, but rhythmic. I went to the window, cupped my hands around my face to block the candle's reflection. In the darkness and white swirl, nothing was visible. Only once did a shadow flicker tall, shapeless, more like a swaying pillar. I chalked it up to a trick of light and snow, but the knocking was getting closer. Now it was heard not through the noise, but over it. Clear, insistent. It was moving down the hallway, not the hallway of the apartment. The hallway of the stairwell. My heart pounded somewhere in my throat. I crept to the front door, pressed against the peephole. The stairwell was dark too, only an emergency light somewhere below cast yellow, dancing shadows. And I saw it. It was tall, taller than a person, and made of packed, compressed snow, dark with grime and shadows. Its outline resembled a human, but its limbs were too long, and its head was just a shapeless lump. Instead of a face, indentations resembling eye sockets and a mouth. It moved slowly, with a characteristic grating sound, along the wall, dragging one elongated arm along the seams between the panels. It was going door to door, and at each door it paused for a moment. I saw how the shapeless head tilted, as if sniffing or listening. Cold radiated from it even through the door. I felt the temperature in the hallway drop. My breath was now coming out in white puffs. It stopped at my neighbor's door, old Anna Stepanovna's. It froze, went still, and then suddenly a quiet, hissing sound, like snow sifting into a narrow crack. I saw a white, twisting tendril of frost slither from under her door. It crawled across the floor, weaving around the doorframe, A light cracking sound was heard. The wood was freezing. Anna Stepanovna's door opened inward quietly, without a creak. Inside was pitch darkness and silence. The creature grated and slid inside. A minute later, there was one single sound, a short, muffled crunch, like a large icicle snapping. I didn't hear anything else after that, only the howl of the blizzard. The creature didn't come out. It simply vanished into that darkness. Since then, I haven't slept. I sit by the door with a kitchen knife in my trembling hands and listen. The storm hasn't let up for 3 days. The forecasts say the cyclone is stalled, but I know the truth. It's not the cyclone that's stalled, it's hunting, and sooner or later the knocking will repeat. It will be at my door, and it will listen to my breathing, listen to my heart pounding, and then, from under the door, a thin, deadly stripe of frost will creep in, and after it, the cold that has taken form. The snowfall in the forecast was labeled moderate. Anton even laughed at that word when he set out. The sky was clear, the cold was ordinary, the road familiar down to every bend. He had driven it dozens of times. Nothing could happen. The first flakes appeared abruptly, like static on an old videotape, heavy, wet. They struck the windshield and melted instantly. Then there were more, far more. Within 10 minutes, the wipers could no longer keep up, and the white ahead of the headlights turned thick and grainy, as if someone were pouring flour directly into the air. The radio clicked. The announcer's voice cut off mid-sentence. Anton reached for the volume knob and noticed his fingers were shaking. The wind intensified so fast that he never realized when the road disappeared. It didn't fade, it vanished, as if erased with a rubber. Anton slowed to a crawl, straining to see ahead, but the headlights showed nothing except dense, moving snow. It felt as though the car was standing still while the storm rushed toward him. When the car drifted for the third time, he stopped. The engine went quiet, and the world shrank instantly, as if compressed to the size of the cabin. Snow thudded against the doors and roof, and there was something rhythmic in the sound, almost deliberate. Anton checked his phone. 2% battery, no service. He set it face down, as if that made things safer. Time stopped behaving normally. 20 minutes passed, or maybe more. In a blizzard, time didn't flow. It thickened. Anton began to notice details. How slowly his breath fogged the air. How the cabin temperature dropped. How strangely the snow crunched somewhere very close. He looked out the side window and saw a face. He didn't immediately understand it wasn't a reflection. The face was pale, nearly white, as if sculpted from snow. The eyes were dark stains with no reflection. It was so close, Anton could see cracks in its lips. He jerked back, hitting the headrest. The face vanished. For a long time he didn't move. Then, very slowly, he looked again. There was nothing outside, but the glass was warm. Where the face had been, He didn't leave the car, not even when he saw the footprints. They appeared gradually, as if the snow itself were retreating to reveal them. Human footprints, bare, toes clearly pressed into the crusted snow. They circled the car in a perfect ring, unhurried, evenly spaced. What terrified Anton most wasn't the footprints themselves, but that they didn't begin or end. They led nowhere. They simply existed. The first oodah on the bodywork was light, like someone checking if he was still there. The second was stronger. The car rocked slightly. "Go away," Anton said out loud. His own voice sounded Chujin. Someone laughed outside. The laughter was quiet and hoarse, like a voice unused for a very long time. It came from everywhere at once. Anton couldn't tell where exactly. Then something began scratching at the door with fingernails. Slowly, patiently, Anton turned on the headlights. A figure stood in their beam, very tall, too tall to be human. It was bent, as if the world itself was too small for it. He couldn't see its face, only a dark hollow where it should have been. The figure didn't move, but Anton knew if he turned off the lights, it would be closer. He turned them off. The breathing came immediately, right by his ear, cold, wet. Its breath brushed his cheek. "You see us," something whispered from behind. Anton screamed and spun around. The back seat was empty, but the rear window was covered with handprints from the inside. Many of them, small ones, large ones, crooked ones. They slowly slid downward, leaving dull streaks behind. The engine started by itself. Anton didn't remember the drive. He barely remembered anything after the tires touched asphalt again. They found him in the morning at a gas station. He was sitting in the car, wrapped in his jacket, staring at a single point. When asked what had happened, Anton said only one thing: they don't like being seen. Later, a mechanic said there were dents on the roof, as if someone had sat there for a long time, leaning on their hands. And on the windshield, beneath a layer of frost, there was something scratched. Not letters, not a symbol, just the imprint of a face. They said the storm wouldn't last more than a day. We stocked up on food, lit the stove, stuffed the windows with old blankets. At first, it was even cozy. The crackling of firewood, tea from a thermos, playing cards by the light of a kerosene lamp. Outside, the wind howled, burying our dacha settlement, Sosnovi, in a white blind sheet. The unease began with the dogs. The neighbor's husky, usually a stoic guardian, began to howl exactly at midnight. Not just a howl, it was choking, as if being strangled. Then it fell silent. Abruptly, Mom said, "It's gone mad from the wind." But I saw how her hands trembled as she brewed another cup of tea. At 3 in the morning, the power went out, and more frighteningly, the settlement's power plant stopped humming. That constant, steady drone that had become background noise just vanished. A silence fell, broken only by the howl in the chimney. Absolute, oppressive, We listened to it, holding our breath. Then there was a knock on the window, not on the glass on the frame. Clear, methodical. Dad grabbed the axe and went to the covered window. "Who's there?" he shouted. In response, only the howl. He pulled back a corner of the blanket and pressed his face to the glass. I saw his face turn ashen in the lamplight. No one. A snowdrift up to the middle of the window. Must be a branch. But his voice was hollow. The knocking returned an hour later, this time on the door. Not loud, but insistent, as if someone small and weak was tapping with a frozen mitten. Dad shouted again. Mum whispered prayers. I picked up the butter knife, ridiculous and helpless. The knocking stopped, and under the door, where the draft was, snow slowly began to creep in. Not loose, but dense, packed, as if someone was tamping it down from the other side. We retreated to the stove, to the very center of the room. The wind now howled with a different tone, not just angry, but mocking. And in its roar, sounds began to emerge. A distant, distorted child's cry, fragments of a lullaby my grandmother used to sing. A whisper impossible to make out, but that made your spine freeze. Then the lamp went out. The kerosene was still almost full. It just died. Only the glow of heat from the stove door remained. It cast flickering, orange shadows on the walls and ceiling. And these shadows did not mimic our movements. One of them, long and thin, detached from the wall and slowly crept across the floor towards Mum. Mom squeezed her eyes shut, muttering, "This isn't happening. This isn't happening." The shadow touched her leg. Mom cried out not from pain, but from cold. An icy, bone-piercing cold radiating from that dark patch on the floor. Dad jumped up, trying to stamp on the shadow, threw a log at it. It passed right through and thudded dully on the floor. The shadow retreated, dissolved among the others. But the cold in the room remained. Even by the blazing stove, our breath was white steam. It's dawn now. The storm hasn't subsided. It has gone quiet. Outside motionless, dead whiteness. No wind, no sound. Absolute silence. And the snow under the door. It's no longer just a drift. It has formed a clear, low silhouette, as if someone very small or very hunched is sitting with their back to us, leaning against the door. Dad is sleeping by the stove, exhausted. Mum is staring at one spot. I am writing this to keep from going mad, so that if they find us, someone will know. It isn't trying to come in. It's just waiting for us to come out on our own. We're getting colder by the minute. The stove is cooling at an unnatural speed. Our food supplies in the corner are covered in frost. I look at that silhouette by the door, and I think it just shifted its shoulder. It knows our heat is running out. It knows that silence is worse than howling. And it knows that the worst storm isn't the one outside. It's the one that patiently, silently creeps into you with the thought, what if I open the door and call out? Maybe it's just a frozen neighbor. Maybe we're just imagining things. But I see the shadows in the corners of the room, are no longer trembling from the flames. They are still, and they are watching, waiting for the first one of us to break. We won't last until evening. I know it.